The machines beeped in a rhythm that had become the only clock that mattered. 8-year-old Ethan Whitfield lay motionless under fluorescent lights that screamed overhead, his small body connected to more tubes than a child should ever need. His father, a man worth $2.3 billion, sat in a chair built for comfort, but offering none. 3 specialists, 14 months of treatment, a diagnosis of refractory autoimmune encephalitis, a condition so rare it appeared in fewer than 200 documented cases worldwide. The lead neurologist's words landed like a verdict. We've exhausted every protocol we have. Money, it turned out, could buy the best doctors in the country. It could not buy a cure that didn't exist yet. Marcus Whitfield had built his company from a $4,000 loan into a logistics empire spanning 31 countries. He had once closed a $900 million acquisition in a single afternoon without raising his voice. Now he sat outside a hospital room, unable to close the one deal that mattered, buying his son more time. He hadn't slept in his own bed in 19 days. He'd stopped taking calls from his board. For the first time in 3 decades of relentless control, Marcus Whitfield had nothing left to negotiate with. 16-year-old Caleb Reyes had been sleeping behind the hospital's east loading dock for 11 months, ever since his mother's death left him with no family and no address to put on a shelter intake form. He wasn't there for charity. He came because the hospital vents blew warm air, and warmth was worth more than pride at 2 a.m. in February. What Marcus didn't know yet was that Caleb had spent those same 11 months reading every discarded medical pamphlet, every torn journal page left in recycling bins outside the research wing, not from ambition, but because there was nothing else to do at night, and reading was free. It was Marcus's assistant who first noticed the teenager quietly asking a nurse about T-cell receptor therapy, a phrase most adults couldn't pronounce, let alone define correctly. When Marcus overheard the boy explain, almost apologetically, a nuance about autoimmune relapse patterns that even one of his $1,200 an hour consultants hadn't mentioned, something shifted. He saw not just a homeless teenager in a torn jacket, but the sheer strength it must have taken to teach himself something this complex with no teacher, no home, and no reason to believe it would ever matter. Caleb mentioned, almost in passing, a 2021 case study from a Brazilian research hospital, one buried in a niche journal, never picked up by Ethan's medical team because it addressed a treatment sequence considered unconventional in Western protocols. It combined 2 existing therapies in a specific 72-hour window, something no one on Ethan's 7-person medical team had cross-referenced. It wasn't a miracle. It was a gap, one created by over-specialization, not incompetence. Marcus, a man who had spent $40 million a year on corporate research and development, had never thought to ask a teenager sleeping outside his son's hospital room a single question. Until now. The lead neurologist was skeptical. Off-label combination therapy based on a single foreign case study was not standard practice. It was a liability. But Marcus had spent his career making decisions specialists called reckless, and 11 of those decisions had built his empire. He authorized the treatment personally, in writing, releasing the hospital from liability. 72 hours later, Ethan's inflammatory markers, numbers that hadn't moved in 14 months, dropped for the first time. Caleb didn't request money. He didn't ask to meet Ethan. When Marcus offered him a reward, Caleb said only that he wanted somewhere quiet to keep studying. He'd been trying to get his GED between hospital vents and library hours for 8 months. It was a request so small, next to a man who moved billions, that it briefly stunned Marcus into silence. He realized the boy wasn't asking for a rescue. He was asking to be given the chance to keep doing, permanently, what he'd already been doing for free. 6 months later, Ethan was in remission, not cured but stable. a word his family had stopped believing they'd hear. Marcus didn't simply pay for Caleb's education. He established the Whitfield Reyes Fellowship, a program now funding 47 homeless and displaced youth across 6 states to pursue medical research training, on the condition that the foundation's advisory board always include at least one person who had once lived without an address. It is, by documented count, the first fellowship of its kind in the country to require lived homelessness experience as a board qualification rather than a barrier to one. Marcus Whitfield had $2.3 billion and access to the best medical minds money could buy. What he lacked for 14 months was a single overlooked variable, one a 16-year-old found not because he was extraordinary, but because he was paying attention out of necessity in a place society had trained itself not to look. The moral isn't that wealth failed. It's that expertise without curiosity has a blind spot, and sometimes the person standing outside the system sees the gap. No one inside it thought to check.